Okay, well, comrades, I've been asked to speak on what is money. I'm going to try and keep it relatively short, and maybe we can take it through with questions and discussion. Well, there it is. It's a bit sad. It's only a fiver. The first thing to say about it, it's no use to man or beast, is it? I mean, this as it stands. It only has one use in that you can get things that are useful with it. Like if I'm not mistaken, you probably get about 40, 50 pence change from the chip shop, fish and chips. And none of the pubs around here look that enticing. But having said that, I reckon you probably run to about 2 pints of beer with a fiver. So what we're actually talking about is not about money, because money is just a means of swapping. It's useless, but it's a means of swapping things about that are useful to us. This is a gross simplification, and I'm going to spend quite a lot of time qualifying it, but let's just start like that. Money is no use to us. It's just a way of swapping things around that are of use to us. So what we're actually interested in is value. You know, why 2 pints of beer are about the same as fish and chips, and why both of those things cost very much less than a house, and both of them cost a great deal more than a box of matches. Okay? So that's value. Now, the problem is actually a capitalist economy, just to tell you what I'm going to tell you. And that is that in any form of society we have a division of labour. The word economics comes from a Greek word, oikonomia, which means household management. And the point about a household is it might be organised democratically or it might be organised autocratically, but it is organised. It is planned. Somebody says, we need this, this, this and this, and this is what we've got to go out and get it. You've got to do this, you've got to do that. You do the washing up. All those sort of decisions are arrived at somehow in quite a conscious way. And under capitalism, it is unique that nobody actually decides that. I mean, you are part of the grand scheme of things. We're going to have a discussion tomorrow, I think nearly all of you are going to be there, where you find out that there are subprime mortgages, that Joe and Josephine Soap in Peoria in southern Illinois find out that their mortgage has been sold on to some bloke in a bank called Northern Rock in a town called Newcastle in a place called England that they've never heard of. That's a world division of labour, but it's not a conscious world division of labour. Nobody says that that's going to take place. So therefore prices are mysterious, and we know they're important to us, that they decide whether your quality of life and what your standard of living is going to be. But people don't actually understand them. But we go beyond money and we start with the commodity. That's what Marx started with, the commodity. A commodity is two things. It's a useful object like fish and chips, and also it's got something else about it. It must be exchangeable for something else, such as 2 pints of beer. Now, obviously, if you look at 2 pints of beer and fish and chips, there is absolutely no physical way that you compare them. You can't weigh them or measure them or anything like that and work out how they're the same in any way whatsoever. So what is the same about them? There must be something the same about them if they're being compared, is social. It's not a natural phenomenon. And Marx calls it value or exchange value. And in effect, what is happening is that both of these commodities, fish and chips and 2 pints of beer, are part of a huge global division of labour, and part of the pool of labour which is available to us, like one vast household consisting of more than 6 billion people, is actually being allocated to the production of pints of beer on the one hand and fish and chips on the other hand. So a commodity is both a useful object, which Marx calls a use value, and it's also an exchange value. Okay? And that common thing that they both have in common is that they are both properties of human labour. They're part of the pool of labour which is available to us. Now, Marx started off with a more boring example, which was about 20 yards of linen equals one coat. And he went through this. And what happened was, in the exchange, is that one is used as the measure of the other. You go through different forms of value, what are called the relative and the equivalent form. You're saying, oh, well, let's use a coat and measure other things. Oh, well, a coat is equal to 20 yards of linen, and it's also equals to this amount of snuff. I think various other 19th century examples he uses. All these things are equal, and they're equal because they have equal quantities of labour embodied in them. On average, we'll qualify that later on. But labour is the only common substance that these things have about them. There's nothing physical about them. And so that's what they have in common. But the point is that the coat or the linen or whatever it is being used as a basis to work out what other things are worth to us. So in other words, it's being used as a primitive money form. From going to the equivalent form of value, 20 yards of linen equals one coat, which you're just doing as a one-off swap to start off with. When exchange becomes generalised, you're going to you're going to be doing this on a regular basis. You're going to be drawing a whole schedule of things that are equal to one coat. Now you can see, so the point is you never actually work out how much labour is embodied in a thing directly. You're just saying it's equal to this. It's some of you know the terminology. It's ordinal, not cardinal. You're not actually measuring the amount of labour. Oh, there's probably 36.5 labour hours in that one, directly and indirectly. Because if you imagine it, even working out quite a simple thing like a coat, probably starts off with some Welsh hill farmer, breeding sheep, and then somebody making plastic. It's really quite complicated working out the amount of labour that goes into a production of even such a straightforward thing as a coat. Because the button manufacturing machine, presumably there's a little bit of depreciation every time they pop a button off, but I bet there's people in some back street place that go for years and years and years, like us lot with our printing equipment, with obsolescent button-making machines. And actually working the depreciation out on of a button-making machine would be how much of it goes into an individual button would really be quite hard. Now, we're using a coat measure of value. Now, I think you can see right away what the problems of a coat measure of value are. What about 5 yards of linen? What are we going to do? Sort of cut one of the sleeves off and say that's the same as that? It's not very practical, is it? So you have two problems. First of all, you have to have something that you can sort of cut up into finite bits, so you can measure all sorts of different other things that are around. And precious metals naturally went that way because you could melt them down. You could have big lumps of gold or silver and small lumps of gold and silver. And the other thing is it has to be a thing that's fairly generally wanted. I mean, it appears that the first trading peoples were pastoralists, people who bred cattle and stuff like that and wandered around and exchanged cows with people for other things. Now, you can see the problem with that. I mean, you can't really cut the leg off a cow if you just want a couple of cups of tea. It's not, so you have to be able to, although cattle was generally accepted, because most of us like eating from time to time, it was not really a very practical way. So in the end, it devolved on the precious metals. So this time, there was another problem as well. Let's assume that you've got the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker in a village. Now, the butcher got a nice lump of meat, which he wants to sell. The candlestick maker wants a lump of meat to take home this evening, but of course the butcher doesn't want candlesticks today, no thank you. This is called a double coincidence of wants in the trade, which is what you've got to have in a barter situation. And you can actually eliminate that by the candlestick maker flogging his candles to somebody quite other than the butcher, getting the money, and then going over to the butcher and say, oh yeah, well, I'll have that nice pair of pork chops over there. And away you go. And so that's how money evolved. Now, I'm going to come back to labour as a substance of value a little bit later on. But notice that I'm doing something totally different from what we did at the start, where we just said, well, money, it's just conventional, it's just got the Queen's head on it, and we use it to swap stuff about. We're saying, which was also true in Marx's day, and that's, I'm taking you through Marx's stuff, and then we've got to sort of qualify it, that there was commodity money in the 19th century. That if you got a £5 note from the Bank of England, which was the smallest notes that they did, which would have been many weeks' wages to most workers. So I imagine most workers would never have seen a Bank of England £5 note in the 19th century. But you could take it into the Bank of England and get 5 gold sovereigns back. They would only issue a £5 note if there was gold backing in the vaults of the Bank of England. So you were actually talking about commodity money. And despite the fact that, OK, they're actually using paper, because let's face it, that's handier than lumping gold about, that was as good as gold at that time. You could take that £5 back at any time and say, stuff that, I want gold. And because you would say that, and because they had to be able to back every single £5, except for 14 million for some weird reason that I don't fully understand, but it's not very important. But because they had to back it up, it was as good as gold. You know, you would not get them just pumping Mickey Mouse money out to pay their bills, which is a possibility that arises when you get an inconvertible paper currency. And let's go back to value now, and have a sort of fictitious development of the exchange relationship. So you get washed onto a desert island, and a couple of survivors from the wreck get washed onto the desert island. First of all, you pursue your own survival. So you're shinning up coconut trees, grabbing a coconut, down you come. Now, there's going to be... I've never been able to find this quote. I'd like to be able to see it. That Trotsky said, man is a lazy creature. And he was all in favour of it. Because there's you sitting there thinking, oh, God, I've got to shin up this coconut tree. It takes me half an hour. And all I get is one sodding coconut out of the whole thing. So therefore, you get a branch and you get a few creepers. Bingo, you've made a primitive ladder. You see? And so you can just run up the ladder, boom, boom, boom. And this is, as you might have noticed, it's a story, but it tries to reflect what has actually happened with the development of human society. The most fundamental thing about the development of human society is the development of the powers of production. That we can make things and get things that we want quicker than we could have 1,000,000 years ago. And that is progress. That is real progress. Now, who gets the benefit of that progress in a class society is another matter. But it genuinely is potentially an enormously progressive thing for human beings. That they can get the things they want with less effort than they could before. So far, they've got these 3 characters and they've all invented ladders, and they don't have to spend their whole time picking coconuts. They can turn their hand to other things. So they decide that what they're going to do is they're going to make root beer. Okay? Now, they're all sitting around drinking their root beer, and they know one evening, and they notice that Fred's root beer is much better than anyone else's. So they say, Fred, got a bright idea. You brew all the root beer, we'll pick your coconuts for you. Thus, exchange is born, you see. Now, the basis, the question that comes to you, obviously, is how much root beer will exchange for a coconut in this first act of exchange? And the answer is going to be that if it takes you half an hour to pick a coconut and half an hour to brew